The murky waters of Kepler 442b stretched endlessly before Marcus Chen as he descended into the alien lake. His diving suit's lights cut through the strange phosphorescent particles that drifted like stars in the dark water. The gravity here was lighter than Earth's, making his movements feel almost dreamlike as he sank deeper into the unknown depths. Marcus had volunteered for this mission when the other xenobiologists refused. The lake showed unusual energy readings and someone needed to investigate. The orbital scans revealed something large at the bottom, something that didn't match any known geological formations. His colleagues called it reckless. Marcus called it necessary. At 50 meters down, his lights began to reveal the lake floor. Massive crystalline formations jutted up like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting his suit's illumination in strange patterns. The water here felt different, heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of centuries. Then he saw her, chained between two towering crystal spires. A creature unlike anything in Earth's fossil records lay motionless. She was enormous, easily 30 meters from snout to tail, with scales that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. Her wings, folded against her body, showed intricate patterns that reminded Marcus of circuit boards, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Even in the murky water, he could see they were open, aware and filled with an intelligence that made his breath catch. The chains that bound her were no primitive metal. They pulsed with the same energy readings that had brought him here, each link inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The creature's massive head turned slightly as she noticed his approach, and Marcus realized with shock that those ancient eyes were wet with tears that mixed with the alien water. She was crying. Marcus had studied xenobiology for 15 years, had dreamed of first contact since childhood, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The creature's gaze met his through his helmet's faceplate, and he felt something pass between them. Not telepathy, not magic, but something more fundamental. Recognition, understanding. A plea for help that transcended species. His training screamed at him to observe, document, report back. But Marcus Chen had become a scientist because he believed knowledge should serve compassion, not the other way around. He swam closer, his heart pounding as the creature's enormous head tracked his movement. She made no aggressive moves, despite being easily capable of crushing him even while bound. The chains were anchored deep into the crystal formations, but Marcus could see the weak points where centuries of strain had created stress fractures. He activated his suit's cutting laser, a tool meant for collecting mineral samples, and approached the nearest anchor point. The creature's eyes widened as she realized his intent. She made a sound that his suit's audio pickups registered as a low musical tone that resonated through the water. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Marcus worked methodically, his laser slowly weakening the crystal anchor points. The energy in the chains fought back, sending painful feedback through his suit's systems, but he persisted. Behind him, the creature began to sing, a wordless melody that seemed to give him strength and focus. The first chain snapped with a sound like breaking thunder. The creature's left foreleg fell free, and she flexed it experimentally, as if remembering what freedom felt like. Marcus moved to the second anchor point, then the third. Each chain that fell brought more of that haunting song, and Marcus began to understand that this wasn't just gratitude he was hearing. It was hope. When the final chain parted, the creature floated free for the first time in what Marcus suspected had been centuries. She was graceful in the water, her movements flowing like liquid mercury. She approached him slowly, carefully, her massive head coming to rest gently against his much smaller form. Through his suit, Marcus felt the vibration of her voice as she spoke. His translation software, designed for human languages, couldn't parse the words, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you," the most universal phrase in any language. Marcus activated his emergency beacon, knowing his team would track him to this location within hours. But as he looked into those ancient, grateful eyes, he realized this was only the beginning. The creature's chains hadn't been random. They were sophisticated, designed by intelligence to hold something of immense power, which meant somewhere above them her captors might still exist. The creature seemed to sense his thoughts. She gestured with one wing toward the surface, then toward herself, then made a sweeping motion that encompassed the entire lake. Marcus understood. She wasn't the only one. Her people were still up there, still prisoners. As they began their ascent together, Marcus keyed his radio to contact the orbital station. Whatever force had chained a dragon to the bottom of an alien lake was about to learn what humans did when they found someone in chains. The creature swam beside him, matching his slower pace, occasionally brushing against his suit with what he could only interpret as affection. Marcus had come down here as a scientist on a routine survey mission. He was returning as something else entirely, a liberator. The surface of the lake shimmered above them, alien sunlight filtering down through the strange water. Marcus Chen had made first contact, but more than that, he had made a choice that would define not just his future, but possibly the future of human-alien relations in this part of the galaxy. Behind them, the broken chains settled into the crystal formations at the lake's bottom. Their purpose finally ended. Ahead lay a world that neither human nor dragon had seen before, where mercy had forged the first link in what would become an unbreakable alliance. The dragon's song echoed through the water as they rose, and Marcus found himself humming along, adding his voice to a melody older than human civilization but somehow perfectly in harmony with it. The emergency shelter Marcus had deployed on the lake's shore hummed with activity as his translation algorithms worked overtime. The dragon, who had introduced herself through a series of musical tones that his computer rendered as Zephyra, lay partially submerged in the shallow water near the shore. Her massive form created gentle waves that lapped against the metallic walls of his temporary base. Dr. Sarah Kim's voice crackled through the communication array from the orbital station. "Marcus, you realize what you've done down there violates about 17 first contact protocols?" "I violated prison protocols," Marcus replied, watching Zephyra's head turn toward his voice with obvious curiosity. "There's a difference." The translation breakthrough had come when Marcus realized that Zephyra's language wasn't just vocal. Her scales shifted color and pattern while she spoke, creating a visual component that added layers of meaning to her musical words. His AI had to process both audio and visual data simultaneously, creating a complex but beautiful translation matrix. "Your people," Zephyra said, her voice now rendered in Marcus's native English through his speakers. "They speak to the sky nest?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed, gesturing toward his communication equipment. "My friend Sarah is up there along with others of my kind. We came from very far away to explore this world." Zephyra's eyes, each larger than Marcus's entire torso, studied him with an intensity that was both flattering and humbling. "You are pack hunters, yes? Like the Veltar who chained us." The name sent a chill through Marcus. "Tell me about the Veltar." Zephyra's scales darkened to deep purples and blacks as she spoke. "They came from the void between stars as you did, but where you freed chains, they forged them. My people, the Draconis, ruled the skies of 17 worlds before the Veltar arrived." Through his equipment, Marcus recorded every word while his mind raced with implications. An interstellar empire of dragons conquered by another alien species. The geopolitical ramifications were staggering. "How long have you been imprisoned?" he asked. "Your star has circled this world 700 times since my capture," Zephyra replied. "I was young then, barely 3 centuries old. Now I am ancient by your standards, though still considered inexperienced by my people." Marcus did the math quickly. 700 local years with this planet's longer orbital period meant roughly 900 Earth years. "You've been chained down there for 9 centuries?" "The lake was once a valley where my nestlings played." Zephyra's voice carried notes of profound sadness. "The Veltar flooded it with their machines, filled it with water that dampens our fire and weakens our flight. They sank me there as an example to others, a warning of what happens to those who resist." "Where are the others now?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Above," Zephyra gestured skyward with one wing, "in the floating cities. The Veltar keep them as slaves, forced to mine the crystal formations that power their technology. My people's natural affinity for manipulating energy makes them valuable workers." Marcus felt anger building in his chest. "How many?" "Perhaps 10,000 remain from our original population of millions. The Veltar are efficient in their cruelty." The communication array buzzed with an incoming priority message. Dr. Kim's voice was tight with concern. "Marcus, we're detecting multiple energy signatures approaching your position. Large ones." Through the shelter's transparent walls, Marcus could see shapes moving in the sky, sleek angular vessels that seemed to bend light around themselves. As they descended, their true size became apparent. Each ship was easily the size of a city block, and there were dozens of them. Zephyra's scales flashed bright warning colors as she caught sight of the approaching fleet. "The Veltar," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "They have felt the breaking of my chains. Can you fight them?" Marcus asked, though he was already moving to his emergency equipment locker. "Not after 9 centuries of captivity," Zephyra admitted. "My strength returned slowly. But you, small sky swimmer, you have something they do not expect. What's that? You freed me when you could have simply observed. You acted from kindness when calculation would have served better. The Veltar cannot comprehend such behavior." The first ship settled onto the shore with a sound like breaking glass. Geometric patterns covered its hull, and as Marcus watched, sections of it began to unfold like a deadly flower. Creatures emerged that defied easy description. They were tall and angular, with too many joints in their limbs and faces that seemed to shift when not looked at directly. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, like parts of a single organism. Zephyra moved to place herself between Marcus and the approaching aliens, despite her weakened condition. Her action wasn't strategic, Marcus realized. It was protective. She was trying to shield him. "Draconis Slave Unit Designate Zephyra 779, spoke one of the Veltar, its voice emerging from translation devices that rendered the words in perfect, emotionless English. "You will return to designated containment. The inferior species that freed you will be processed for study." "I am no longer your slave," Zephyra replied, her scales now blazing with defiant gold and crimson patterns. "I am free, and I choose to stand with those who break chains rather than forge them." Marcus keyed his radio to the orbital station. "Sarah, I need you to get a message to Earth. High priority emergency classification. We've made contact with not one but 2 alien species. One is enslaved, the other is their captor. Humanity needs to decide which side we're on." "Already done," came the reply. "Fleet Command received our preliminary report an hour ago. Help is coming, Marcus, but it'll take time." The Veltar commander tilted its shifting head in what might have been amusement. "Your species broadcast its intentions across space with the subtlety of a solar flare. We detected your communications the moment your kind entered this system. You are few and we are many. You will comply or you will be eliminated." Marcus looked up at Zephyra, whose ancient eyes met his with absolute trust. Then he looked at the assembled Veltar, with their perfect coordination and calculated cruelty. The choice wasn't difficult. "I'm a xenobiologist," Marcus said calmly, "and not a soldier. But I've studied thousands of species across hundreds of worlds. You know what I've learned about humans?" The Veltar commander waited. "We really don't like bullies." Marcus triggered his emergency beacon, sending a signal that would alert every human ship within 3 light years. It was a call for help, but more than that, it was a declaration of intent. Humanity had chosen its side. As Veltar forces spread out around them, Zephyra began to sing again, her voice carrying across the water. In the distance, Marcus thought he could hear answering calls from the floating cities above. The dragon's song was reaching her people, carrying news of freedom and hope. The war for liberation was about to begin. The Veltar energy cage hummed around Marcus and Zephyra like an angry beehive. The geometric patterns of light that formed their prison shifted and pulsed, responding to any movement with painful feedback. Marcus had learned not to touch the walls after his first attempt had left his arm numb for an hour. "Fascinating technology," he admitted, studying the energy matrix with professional interest despite their circumstances. "It's almost like they're weaving space-time itself into a containment field." Zephyra's massive head rested near him, her scales dim with exhaustion. "They learned it from my people," she said quietly. "Dragons have always been able to manipulate energy, to bend the natural forces to our will. The Veltar studied us, dissected us, until they understood our abilities well enough to turn them against us." Marcus felt a surge of anger at the casual mention of dissection, but he forced himself to focus on learning. Knowledge was their only weapon right now. "Can you still access those abilities?" "Weakly. 9 centuries of imprisonment have dulled my connection to the energy flows of the universe." Zephyra's eyes fixed on something beyond the cage, but I can feel them stirring. "Your act of kindness has awakened something in me that I thought was lost forever." Through the energy barriers, Marcus could see their Veltar captors moving with that same eerie coordination. They never seemed to communicate directly, yet they worked together with perfect efficiency. It was as if they shared a single mind distributed across multiple bodies. How do they coordinate like that? Marcus asked. They are a hive mind, Zephyra explained. Individual consciousness exists only at the lowest levels. Most of what you see are merely extensions of a greater intelligence. It makes them efficient but also predictable. They cannot understand individual choice, personal sacrifice, the bonds between separate beings. Marcus thought about that. Is that why they can't understand why I freed you? Precisely. In their calculations, you should have observed and reported. Freeing me served no logical purpose for your survival or advancement. They literally cannot process your motivation. A new Veltar approached their cage, this one larger and more elaborate than the others. Its translation device activated as it studied them. Human designation, Marcus Chen. Your species has been contacted. They demand your release. Marcus straightened. And? We have proposed an exchange. You and the escaped slave unit for information about your military capabilities and technology. And what did my people say? The Veltar's shifting features might have been expressing satisfaction. They declined. Instead, they transmitted a message. We will relay it now. The translation device switched to a different voice, one Marcus recognized as Admiral Torres from the Colonial Defense Force. Dr. Chen, this is Admiral Torres. We've reviewed your situation and your preliminary reports. I want you to know that the entire human fleet is en route to your position. We don't negotiate with slavers and we don't abandon our people. Hold fast. Help is coming. Marcus felt a surge of pride in his species, followed immediately by concern. How large is the human fleet they're bringing? The Veltar commander tilted its head. 47 vessels of various classes. An impressive response for such a young species, but insufficient. We control 300 worlds and maintain a military force of over 10,000 ships. Zephyra's scales suddenly blazed with bright gold and silver patterns. 10,000 ships, but how many crews? The Veltar paused, and Marcus sensed confusion in its stillness. Clarify your question. How many individual minds command those ships? How many separate beings make the decisions that guide your fleets? The central mind directs all operations. Individual units execute predetermined functions. Zephyra looked at Marcus with what he was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. Do you understand what she's telling us? Marcus thought about it, then grinned. They have one commander controlling 10,000 ships. If something happens to that central intelligence, the entire fleet becomes helpless, Zephyra confirmed. This is why they fear individual consciousness, why they work so hard to suppress it in their subjects. Independence of thought is their greatest weakness. The Veltar commander seemed to realize it had revealed too much. It began to withdraw, but Zephyra spoke again. I have a message for your central mind, she said, her voice taking on harmonic overtones that made the energy cage flicker. Tell it that the song of freedom has begun, and even its perfect order cannot silence all voices. As if in response to her words, a distant sound echoed across the lake. Other dragons calling from the floating cities above, their voices carrying the same melody Zephyra had sung when Marcus first freed her. The Veltar commander's form flickered with what might have been alarm. The slave units are responding to unauthorized frequency emissions, it said into a communication device, implementing immediate suppression protocols. But the songs continued, growing stronger. Marcus realized that Zephyra's message was spreading through the entire population of captive dragons. They were remembering what freedom sounded like. Your people, Marcus said quietly. They're not broken, are they? Dragons are born to fly, Zephyra replied, her own voice joining the distant chorus. You can clip our wings, chain our bodies, but you cannot cage our spirits forever. Today, for the first time in 9 centuries, my people remember that they are not slaves. They are dragons. The energy cage around them began to fluctuate as more voices joined the song. Marcus watched in amazement as the harmonic frequencies created by thousands of dragons singing in unison began to interfere with Veltar technology. Throughout the floating cities, lights flickered and systems failed. It's beautiful, Marcus breathed, listening to the wordless melody that seemed to speak directly to something fundamental in his human soul. Freedom always is, Zephyra agreed, and it is contagious. Once it begins to spread, no force in the universe can stop it. The Veltar commander was speaking rapidly into its communication device now, its form flickering with increasing agitation. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Fear. Above them, the first human ships were entering the atmosphere, their engines leaving bright trails across the alien sky. Admiral Torres had kept her word, but as Marcus watched the sleek human vessels approaching, he realized that this battle would be won or lost not by superior firepower, but by something the Veltar could never understand. The power of choice. The strength that came from free beings choosing to stand together against oppression. Zephyra's song grew stronger, and Marcus found himself humming along, adding his human voice to a harmony that spanned species and worlds. Around them, the energy cage wavered and failed as the Veltar's perfect technology encountered something it had no protocols for handling. The sound of hope, sung by voices that refused to be silenced. In the distance, Marcus could see dragons breaking free from their restraints in the floating cities, their ancient wings remembering how to fly. The liberation had begun, and it was spreading faster than the Veltar could contain it. The universe was about to learn what happened when humans and dragons sang the same song. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like avenging angels, their fusion drives painting the sky with brilliant blue-white fire. Admiral Elena Torres stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Defiant, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 47 ships against 10,000 seemed impossible odds, but she hadn't survived 30 years of colonial defense by accepting conventional wisdom. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the sensor station, "I'm reading massive energy disruptions throughout the Veltar installations. It's almost like their entire network is experiencing coordinated system failures." Torres smiled. "That would be Dr. Chen's dragon friends. Open a channel to all ships." The communication array crackled to life, connecting her voice to every human vessel in the fleet. "This is Admiral Torres to all units. We're facing an enemy that has enslaved an entire species for nearly 1,000 years. They expect us to be reasonable, to negotiate, to accept the status quo. They're about to learn that humans don't negotiate with slavers." Below them, the Veltar fleet was responding to the human arrival with their characteristic efficiency. Geometric ships rose from hidden bases, their hulls reflecting the alien sunlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Energy readings spiked as they powered weapons systems that could glass entire continents. "Energy signatures suggest they're charging planet crackers," Hayes reported, his voice tight with concern. "They won't use them," Torres said with confidence. "Not while their control centers are still on the surface. That's their weakness, people. They've built their entire civilization around centralized control. We're going to cut the head off the snake." On the surface, Marcus watched the battle unfold through the flickering remains of their energy cage. The dragon song had weakened the Veltar technology enough for Zephyra to break free, her massive form rising from the lake with water cascading from her wings. For the first time in 9 centuries, she was truly airborne. "It feels like being reborn," she said, her voice filled with wonder as she tested her flight capabilities. "I had forgotten how magnificent the world looks from above." Marcus activated his emergency communicator, hoping the frequencies would cut through the interference. "Admiral Torres, this is Dr. Chen. The dragon songs are disrupting Veltar systems across the planet, but we need to locate their central mind." Torres's voice crackled back through static. "Already on it, Doctor. We're tracking the source of their coordination signals. It's coming from a structure in the northern hemisphere, completely shielded and heavily defended." "I can guide you there," Zephyra said, her enhanced hearing picking up the transmission. "I know where they keep their abomination." The first wave of Veltar fighters screamed past overhead, their weapons discharging energy that turned sections of the lakeshore into glass. But their targeting seemed erratic, confused by the harmonic interference still echoing from the freed dragons throughout the floating cities. "They're fighting blind," Marcus realized. "The dragon songs are jamming their coordination network." Zephyra's scales shifted to deep blue and silver as she concentrated. "Not just jamming it. We're overloading it. For 9 centuries, they've used our people's natural energy manipulation abilities to power their technology. Now that same energy is being turned against them." Above them, the human fleet engaged the Veltar vessels in a dance of physics and fire. Human ships, smaller and more maneuverable, darted between the massive alien constructs like angry wasps. Their weapons, crude compared to Veltar energy manipulation, nonetheless found their marks through superior tactics and unpredictable individual decision-making. "Human vessel. Dauntless to surface team," came a new voice over the radio. "This is Captain Sarah Kim. Dr. Chen, are you reading me?" Marcus nearly laughed with relief. "Sarah? Good to hear your voice, and likewise. We're reading massive energy buildup from the northern continent. Whatever you and your new friend did down there, it's spreading. The entire Veltar command structure is destabilizing." Zephyra's head turned toward the north, her ancient eyes focusing on something beyond the horizon. The central mind is attempting to assert direct control over all dragon slaves simultaneously. It's trying to force them to stop singing. Can it do that? Not without destroying their minds in the process. The Veltar may be willing to sacrifice their slaves to maintain control. Zephyra's voice carried a note of urgent concern. We must reach the central mind before it implements total neural domination. Marcus looked up at the aerial battle raging overhead, then at Zephyra's massive form. I don't suppose dragons give rides? For the first time since he'd met her, Zephyra laughed. It was a sound like silver bells mixed with distant thunder. Marcus Chen, you continually surprise me. Yes, dragons give rides to those brave enough to ask. As Marcus climbed onto Zephyra's back, securing himself with emergency straps from his equipment, he opened a channel to Admiral Torres. Admiral, we're going after the central mind directly. Keep them busy up here. Negative, Dr. Chen. That's a suicide mission. With respect, Admiral, everything we've done so far has been a suicide mission. The difference is now we're not doing it alone. Zephyra's wings caught the wind with a sound like thunder, lifting them from the ground with surprising gentleness. As they climbed toward the battle, Marcus could see the true scope of what was happening. All across the planet, dragons were breaking free from their restraints, their songs creating a harmonic wave that was systematically dismantling centuries of Veltar infrastructure. But it wasn't just the dragons. In the floating cities, other enslaved species were responding to the liberation song. Creatures Marcus couldn't name were smashing their way out of work centers and processing facilities. The revolution was spreading beyond anything the Veltar had calculated. Your people don't just free themselves, Zephyra observed as they soared between human and Veltar vessels. They free everyone around them. It's what we do, Marcus replied, watching human fighters coordinate with newly freed dragons in aerial maneuvers that should have been impossible. We see chains, we break them. We see oppression, we fight it. Sometimes we're stupid about it, but we're consistent. A Veltar interceptor swooped toward them, its weapons charging with lethal intent. But before it could fire, 3 human fighters and 2 dragons converged on it from different angles, their combined fire reducing it to debris. Formation flying, Zephyra mused. Different species, different capabilities, but working toward the same goal. The Veltar cannot adapt to such spontaneous cooperation. They were approaching the northern continent now, where a massive structure rose from the landscape like a crystalline mountain. Energy patterns cascaded across its surface in hypnotic waves, and Marcus could feel the malevolent intelligence that dwelt within it, pressing against his consciousness. That's it, Zephyra confirmed. The central mind, the source of 1,000 years of suffering. Marcus checked his equipment one final time. He was a scientist, not a warrior. But sometimes science meant taking calculated risks to test a hypothesis. His hypothesis was simple. Every system had a breaking point. Time to find out if the Veltar's perfect order could survive a dose of human unpredictability. Behind them, the liberation song grew stronger as more voices joined the chorus. Ahead lay the heart of an empire built on suffering, and between them rode a human and a dragon, proving that freedom was indeed contagious. The central mind's fortress rose before them like a crystalline cancer, growing from the planet's surface. Its geometric surfaces pulsed with patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process, and the air around it hummed with energies that made Marcus's instruments scream warnings about radiation levels that should have been lethal. It's bigger than I expected, Marcus said as Zephyra circled the structure, looking for a way inside. The Veltar built it using my people's labor, Zephyra replied, her voice carrying centuries of pain. Every dragon who died in its construction, every mind that was broken in its service, their suffering is woven into its very foundations. The fortress's defenses activated as they approached, energy beams lancing out with surgical precision, but Zephyra flew like the wind itself, twisting through the deadly light with grace that belonged to another age. Her movements weren't just evasive, Marcus realized. They were artistic. There, she said, angling toward what looked like a sealed section of wall. The intake ports for the neural processing arrays. They'll be heavily shielded, but you know how they work, Marcus finished, because you helped build them. Not by choice, Zephyra's scales darkened with old anger, but knowledge gained in chains can still be used to break them. She landed on the crystalline surface with surprising delicacy, her claws finding purchase on the alien material. Marcus dismounted quickly, his scientific equipment already analyzing the structure's composition. The readings were unlike anything in human databases, but patterns were emerging. "It's not just technology," he said in amazement. "It's alive. The entire structure is a hybrid of machine and organism. The central mind grew it around itself like a shell," Zephyra confirmed. 900 years of expansion, absorbing knowledge and power from every world it conquered. But organic structures have organic weaknesses. From his equipment pack, Marcus pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a medical scanner and a plasma cutter. "Genetic disruptor. We developed it for dealing with hostile biological contaminants on new worlds. If this thing is alive, it can be killed," Zephyra said with savage satisfaction. They found the entry point where massive conduits carried energy and information into the fortress's heart. The portal was sealed with force fields that would have stopped any conventional approach, but Zephyra began to sing. Not the liberation song that had freed her people, but something older, more primal. The harmonic frequencies resonated with the crystalline structure, creating stress fractures in the force field matrix. "Dragons have always been creatures of resonance," she explained as the barriers flickered and failed. "We understand how energy flows through matter, how to find the frequencies that tear things apart." They descended into the fortress through maintenance tunnels that were clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. The walls pulsed with organic patterns, and Marcus could hear something like a heartbeat echoing through the structure. They were inside a living being, one that had grown to encompass an entire mountain. "The neural processors are this way," Zephyra said, her natural senses guiding them through the maze of passages. "That's where it maintains control over my people." They emerged into a vast chamber filled with crystalline towers that stretched up into darkness. Each tower contained a dragon, suspended in energy fields while neural interfaces burrowed into their skulls. Thousands of them, their minds enslaved to power the central mind's calculations. Marcus felt sick looking at them. "How long have they been like this?" "Some for centuries. Others were brought here yesterday. Time has no meaning when your consciousness is enslaved." Zephyra's voice shook with rage as she recognized faces among the prisoners. "My nestmate Astria, my flight leader Corvin. They're all here. Can we free them? Not while the central mind controls the interface systems. It would rather kill them than lose them." Zephyra's eyes blazed with determination. "But there's another way." She began to sing again, but this time Marcus felt something different in the melody. It wasn't just harmonics disrupting technology. It was communication, direct mind-to-mind contact with the imprisoned dragons. One by one, their eyes began to open, awareness returning to faces that had been blank for centuries. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked. "Reminding them who they are," Zephyra replied. "The central mind can control their actions, but it cannot change their nature. They are dragons. They were born to be free." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The suspended dragons began to resist their restraints, their natural energy manipulation abilities turning against the systems that held them. Warning alarms blared throughout the chamber as power fluctuations cascaded through the fortress's systems. From deeper in the structure came a sound like a mountain screaming. The central mind was responding to the liberation of its neural processors with something approaching panic. Geometric patterns raced across the walls as it tried to reassert control, but the damage was spreading too quickly. "It's trying to activate emergency protocols," Marcus said, reading the energy spikes on his instruments. "Mass neural burnout. It's going to kill them all rather than lose control." "Not if I can help it," Zephyra snarled. She launched herself into the air, her massive form weaving between the crystalline towers as she sang the liberation song at full volume. The harmonic frequencies, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, created a resonance cascade that shattered the neural interface systems one by one. Dragons began dropping from their suspension fields, their wings remembering how to fly as their minds remembered freedom. But the effort was taking its toll. Marcus could see Zephyra's strength failing as she poured everything she had into freeing her people. 9 centuries of imprisonment had weakened her, and the energy demands of her song were enormous. "There are too many," she gasped, settling onto one of the towers as exhaustion overwhelmed her. "I cannot free them all before the central mind activates its final protocol." Marcus looked at his genetic disruptor, then at the organic walls of the chamber. An idea began forming, crazy enough to be brilliant or stupid enough to be fatal. Probably both. What if we don't just free them? he said. What if we turn them into weapons? Zephyra's ancient eyes focused on him with interest. Explain. The central mind uses their energy manipulation abilities to power its systems. But energy flows both ways. If we can reverse the process, turn the dragons into an overload source instead of a power drain, the feedback would destroy the entire fortress, Zephyra realized. But it would also kill many of them. Or it would set them all free at once. Sometimes you have to break the machine to free the people trapped inside it. Marcus activated his genetic disruptor and began modifying its settings. If his theory was correct, he could use it to disrupt the organic components of the fortress while Zephyra's song redirected the energy flow through the neural networks. Do it, Zephyra said, her voice filled with ancient determination. Freedom is worth any risk. As Marcus began his work, the central mind's presence pressed against them both, a malevolent intelligence trying to crush their minds with pure force of will. But they had something it could never understand. The strength that came from choosing to fight for others, even when the odds were impossible. The battle for the dragon's souls was about to begin. The central mind's fortress rose before them like a crystalline cancer, growing from the planet's surface. Its geometric surfaces pulsed with patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process, and the air around it hummed with energies that made Marcus's instruments scream warnings about radiation levels that should have been lethal. It's bigger than I expected, Marcus said as Zephyra circled the structure, looking for a way inside. The Veltar built it using my people's labor, Zephyra replied, her voice carrying centuries of pain. Every dragon who died in its construction, every mind that was broken in its service, their suffering is woven into its very foundations. The fortress's defenses activated as they approached, energy beams lancing out with surgical precision, but Zephyra flew like the wind itself, twisting through the deadly light with grace that belonged to another age. Her movements weren't just evasive, Marcus realized. They were artistic. There, she said, angling toward what looked like a sealed section of wall. The intake ports for the neural processing arrays. They'll be heavily shielded, but you know how they work, Marcus finished, because you helped build them. Not by choice, Zephyra's scales darkened with old anger, but knowledge gained in chains can still be used to break them. She landed on the crystalline surface with surprising delicacy, her claws finding purchase on the alien material. Marcus dismounted quickly, his scientific equipment already analyzing the structure's composition. The readings were unlike anything in human databases, but patterns were emerging. It's not just technology, he said in amazement. It's alive. The entire structure is a hybrid of machine and organism. The central mind grew it around itself like a shell, Zephyra confirmed. 900 years of expansion, absorbing knowledge and power from every world it conquered. But organic structures have organic weaknesses. From his equipment pack, Marcus pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a medical scanner and a plasma cutter. Genetic disruptor. We developed it for dealing with hostile biological contaminants on new worlds. If this thing is alive, it can be killed, Zephyra said with savage satisfaction. They found the entry point where massive conduits carried energy and information into the fortress's heart. The portal was sealed with force fields that would have stopped any conventional approach, but Zephyra began to sing. Not the liberation song that had freed her people, but something older, more primal. The harmonic frequencies resonated with the crystalline structure, creating stress fractures in the force field matrix. Dragons have always been creatures of resonance, she explained as the barriers flickered and failed. We understand how energy flows through matter, how to find the frequencies that tear things apart. They descended into the fortress through maintenance tunnels that were clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. The walls pulsed with organic patterns, and Marcus could hear something like a heartbeat echoing through the structure. They were inside a living being, one that had grown to encompass an entire mountain. The neural processors are this way, Zephyra said, her natural senses guiding them through the maze of passages. That's where it maintains control over my people. They emerged into a vast chamber filled with crystalline towers that stretched up into darkness. Each tower contained a dragon, suspended in energy fields while neural interfaces burrowed into their skulls. Thousands of them, their minds enslaved to power the central mind's calculations. Marcus felt sick looking at them. How long have they been like this? Some for centuries. Others were brought here yesterday. Time has no meaning when your consciousness is enslaved. Zephyr's voice shook with rage as she recognized faces among the prisoners. My nestmate Astria. My flight leader Corvin. They're all here. Can we free them? Not while the central mind controls the interface systems. It would rather kill them than lose them. Zephyr's eyes blazed with determination. But there's another way. She began to sing again, but this time Marcus felt something different in the melody. It wasn't just harmonics disrupting technology. It was communication, direct mind-to-mind contact with the imprisoned dragons. One by one, their eyes began to open, awareness returning to faces that had been blank for centuries. What are you doing? Marcus asked. Reminding them who they are, Zephira replied. The central mind can control their actions, but it cannot change their nature. They are dragons. They were born to be free. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The suspended dragons began to resist their restraints, their natural energy manipulation abilities turning against the systems that held them. Warning alarms blared throughout the chamber as power fluctuations cascaded through the fortress's systems. From deeper in the structure came a sound like a mountain screaming. The central mind was responding to the liberation of its neural processors with something approaching panic. Geometric patterns raced across the walls as it tried to reassert control, but the damage was spreading too quickly. It's trying to activate emergency protocols, Marcus said, reading the energy spikes on his instruments. Mass neural burnout. It's going to kill them all rather than lose control. Not if I can help it, Zephira snarled. She launched herself into the air, her massive form weaving between the crystalline towers as she sang the liberation song at full volume. The harmonic frequencies, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, created a resonance cascade that shattered the neural interface systems one by one. Dragons began dropping from their suspension fields, their wings remembering how to fly as their minds remembered freedom. But the effort was taking its toll. Marcus could see Zephira's strength failing as she poured everything she had into freeing her people. 9 centuries of imprisonment had weakened her, and the energy demands of her song were enormous. There are too many, she gasped, settling onto one of the towers as exhaustion overwhelmed her. I cannot free them all before the central mind activates its final protocol. Marcus looked at his genetic disruptor, then at the organic walls of the chamber. An idea began forming, crazy enough to be brilliant or stupid enough to be fatal. Probably both. What if we don't just free them? He said. What if we turn them into weapons? Zephira's ancient eyes focused on him with interest. Explain. The central mind uses their energy manipulation abilities to power its systems. But energy flows both ways. If we can reverse the process, turn the dragons into an overload source instead of a power drain, the feedback would destroy the entire fortress, Zephira realized. But it would also kill many of them. Or it would set them all free at once. Sometimes you have to break the machine to free the people trapped inside it. Marcus activated his genetic disruptor and began modifying its settings. If his theory was correct, he could use it to disrupt the organic components of the fortress while Zephira's song redirected the energy flow through the neural networks. Do it, Zephira said, her voice filled with ancient determination. Freedom is worth any risk. As Marcus began his work, the central mind's presence pressed against them both, a malevolent intelligence trying to crush their minds with pure force of will. But they had something it could never understand. The strength that came from choosing to fight for others, even when the odds were impossible. The battle for the dragon's souls was about to begin. 6 months after the liberation of Kepler 442b, the memorial service was held on a hilltop overlooking the lake, where everything had begun. Representatives from 17 worlds had come to pay their respects, but it was the dragons who created the most beautiful tribute. Their songs filled the air with harmonies that spoke of gratitude, loss, and hope for the future. Admiral Torres stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd of humans, dragons, and dozens of other species that had been freed from Veltar control. Dr. Marcus Chen was a xenobiologist, she began, her voice carrying across the gathering. But more than that, he was proof that science and compassion are not opposing forces. They are complementary aspects of what makes us human. Zephira rested nearby, her massive form still showing signs of her long imprisonment, but growing stronger each day. Since the liberation, she had become the unofficial ambassador between her people and the growing alliance of free worlds. Her scales shimmered with patterns of deep blue and gold as she listened to the Admiral's words. Marcus believed that knowledge should serve life, not dominate it, Torres continued. His sacrifice freed not just the dragons of this world, but sparked a revolution that has brought down the Veltar Empire across 3 sectors of space. It was true. The resonance cascade that had destroyed the central mind had sent shockwaves through the quantum communication network that connected all Veltar installations. Within hours, enslaved populations across dozens of worlds had heard the liberation song and begun their own uprisings. The empire built on perfect order had collapsed in a matter of days, unable to adapt to the chaos of spontaneous rebellion. After the ceremony, Captain Sarah Kim approached Zephyra. The two had worked closely together during the reconstruction efforts, forming an unlikely friendship based on their shared memories of Marcus. "Any change?" Sarah asked quietly. Zephyra's great head turned toward a nearby medical facility, where human and dragon healers worked together using techniques that neither species could have developed alone. "The neural pathways are regenerating, but slowly. Human consciousness is remarkably resilient, but the damage was severe." They walked together toward the facility, their conversation mixing technical details with personal concern. Inside, the most advanced medical technology of 2 species surrounded a single bed where Marcus Chen lay in a healing coma. The neural link with the central mind had burned out most of his higher brain functions, but somehow, impossibly, a spark of consciousness remained. "Dragon healing songs have properties that human medicine is only beginning to understand," explained Dr. Vance, the human physician leading the treatment team. "The harmonic frequencies seem to stimulate neural regrowth in ways we never thought possible. And human determination appears to be even more stubborn than we dragons had realized," added Corvin, an ancient dragon whose expertise in energy manipulation had proven invaluable in the healing process. "His mind refuses to let go, as if he's fighting to return to consciousness through sheer force of will." Sarah placed her hand on Marcus's forehead, feeling the warmth of life beneath the surface. "He's dreaming, isn't he?" "Not dreaming," Zephyra said softly. "Learning." The neural link with the central mind left fragments of knowledge in his consciousness. He's processing 9 centuries of accumulated data, transforming it from a weapon of control into a tool of understanding. Through the facility's windows, they could see the construction of New Haven, the first truly integrated city designed for multiple species. Humans and dragons worked side by side with liberated Veltar, who had chosen freedom over the hive mind, and dozens of other beings who had found their voices in the wake of the Empire's collapse. "He would love to see this," Sarah said, watching a group of human children learning to sing harmony with young dragons in the city square below. "He will see it," Zephyra replied with absolute certainty. Marcus Chen chose to sacrifice himself for strangers. That kind of spirit doesn't simply fade away. As if responding to her words, the monitors around Marcus's bed began to show increased activity. His eyes moved beneath closed lids and his breathing became more regular. The healing songs that filled the facility seemed to resonate with something deep within his consciousness. "Neural activity is increasing across all sectors," Dr. Vance reported excitedly. "Synaptic regeneration is accelerating beyond anything we've seen before." Marcus's eyes opened slowly, focusing with difficulty on the faces surrounding his bed. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Did they make it out?" "All of them," Zephyra said, her scales blazing with joy. 10,000 dragons fly free because of your courage, and they are not the only ones." As Marcus's strength returned over the following days, he began to understand the scope of what his sacrifice had accomplished. The knowledge he had absorbed from the central mind, filtered through human compassion rather than alien calculation, was proving invaluable in helping liberated worlds rebuild their civilizations. "The Mate Veltar weren't evil," he explained to the Alliance Council during one of his first public appearances since awakening. "They were afraid of chaos, of the unpredictable nature of individual choice. They built their empire to create order, but they forgot that diversity isn't a weakness to be eliminated. It's a strength to be celebrated." The council chamber erupted in songs, cheers, and various forms of alien applause. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to hear the human who had touched the mind of their former oppressor and chosen forgiveness over revenge. "What's next for humanity in this alliance?" asked Ambassador Thex, a crystalline being whose people had been freed from Veltar mining operations. Marcus looked around the chamber, seeing the incredible diversity of life that now worked together, where once there had been only slaves and masters. We do what we've always done. We explore, we learn, and we help those who need helping. The universe is vast and full of wonders we haven't even imagined yet. After the session, Marcus and Zephyra walked together through the gardens of New Haven, where plants from 17 worlds grew in impossible harmony. Children of a dozen species played together, their laughter creating a symphony that spoke of hope for the future. I still hear the song sometimes, Marcus said, listening to the distant melodies that drifted from the dragon quarters. In my dreams, I can hear every voice that was silenced, every spirit that was broken. But I also hear them healing, becoming whole again. The universe has a long memory, Zephyra replied. It remembers both suffering and kindness. Your choice to show compassion to the central mind in its final moments has become part of that memory. Future generations will know that when humanity first encountered a galactic empire, they chose liberation over domination. As the alien sunset painted the sky in colors that had no names in any human language, Marcus realized that his greatest discovery wasn't the dragons or the Veltar, or even the technology that had reshaped galactic civilization. It was the understanding that consciousness in all its forms was the universe's way of knowing itself. And every choice to preserve that consciousness, to protect the right of all beings to think and dream and hope, made the universe a little more aware of its own infinite potential. The lake where everything had begun sparkled in the distance, no longer a prison but a symbol of transformation. Somewhere in its depths, broken chains lay forgotten while above. Dragons and humans and a dozen other species worked together to build something that had never existed before. A civilization based not on order or chaos, but on the beautiful complexity that emerged when free beings chose to care for one another. The song of liberation continued, and would echo through the stars for generations to come.